Alright, what's up boys? Today we're going to be doing a Mythic Plus guide for Resto Druids in Shadowlands Season 1. My name's Terrasant, I raid in PC, we finished US 8th in Nyalotha, and I was the 6th highest Resto Druid in the US on Raider.io for Season 4 of BFA. I spent a good chunk of time on the Shadowlands beta playing around with Druid and other healers, so I feel fairly comfortable sharing my knowledge. This is mostly going to be an overview of the basics of the specs, such as what Covenant you're going to pick, what Conduits you're going to want to play, what Soulbinds you're going to need to choose, and other things like that. My goal here is to make a guide that someone can watch, log into a Druid, copy what I did, and have success in their keys without knowing too much about the spec. But in the future, I do plan to do a more basic video on how to play for those that have no idea what they're doing at all. So let's get going. First off, we got to get our Covenant. There's only one real choice for Covenant for Resto Druid, and that's going to be Night Fae. You can play Kyrian if you're a Minkin main that cares more about raiding and you want to off-spec your weekly keys so your guild can get some gear. But if you're looking to push the highest keys, there's only one choice. And that's because Convoke the Spirits is just too powerful. It is a 4-second channel, and we get 3 spells cast per second. And those can be a variety of healing and damage spells. This is a 2-minute cooldown that can easily take your entire group from 0% health to full in 4 seconds. If you're Kyrian, you'll get Kindred Empowerment, and you're going to want to link to your tank. It has nowhere even close to the throughput the Convoke has. It's basically a glorified bark skin with a healing funnel on it for your tank. The secondaries of each, the Blink from Soul Shape if you pick Night Fae is pretty okay, but I haven't found too many good uses for it, ultimately. If I was going based solely on the secondaries, I'd pick Kyrian because the file is a 20% health pot and it negates some mechanics throughout the expansion, like the bleed from Ventanax and Spires of Ascension, but ultimately you're going to want to go Night Fae. These are the Soulbinds for each. This is the Night Fae Soulbinds. You're never ever picking Dreamweaver. You can basically ignore this middle tree, it's terrible. If you want the most optimal choice, you're going to pick Karain, who is the 3rd Soulbind, because that gives you 2 potencies, 1 finesse, and 1 endurance conduit. And her main spell at the top is 10% increased healing on low health targets, that's less than or equal to 35%, and increased damage on high HP targets, which there are a lot of in dungeons since you're always pulling new mobs. Those are mobs over 75% health. You'll get 10% increased healing or damage. Naya is the other choice you can take. It'll give you 1 potency, 2 finesses, and 1 endurance, and that's why it's slightly weaker, on top of the fact that her starting ability isn't as good. It just grants stacking mastery, and pressing Convoke will give you 8 stacks instantly, but it's less overall healing, especially if you have low mastery levels, than picking Karain. The only time I would see Naya's mastery increase being super useful would be in a situation like Galv from Temple of Sertoles in BFA, or maybe like Pultharak in Theater of Pain from this expansion. But you're going to want to pick Karain. There's really no other reason to pick anything else. If you're a Boomkin reroll, and you wanted to heal your off keys, if you pick Brawn, you're trolling, don't ever pick that. The only real option here is Pelagos. It's a mastery increase on a 1-minute cooldown, 350 mastery, it's about 5%. It's pretty good in situations where you're going to use Kindred Empowerment anyways, where there's a lot of group damage, or a lot of tank damage and you need to funnel it into them, like funnel your healing into them. Clea, the 2nd Soulbind, is passable, but I would say not that great. Basically every time you crit, you get a stack, and then once a minute you can release that stack as a smart heal, I guess, to anybody in the party that drops under 50% health, and they'll get 20% of their max health back. This is really good if your DPS are super smart and never take any damage, and you can guarantee that that's going to funnel into your tank when they get here really hard. But the problem is that all DPS are greedy and stupid, and they're going to take damage that you don't want them to take. They're going to suck that heal away, and you're going to be stuck on a 1-minute cooldown waiting for your stacks to start up again. And in that time, you know, if your tank needed that heal and they can't get it, then this was a useless Soulbind. On top of the fact that, again, it's 2 finesses, 1 endurance, and 1 potency. And Pelagos is double potency, double endurance for the optimal route, which is really strong. So getting into the conduits, these are the potency conduits for Resto Druid. Flash of Clarity is going to make your clear class regrowths heal for more. Floral Recycling is going to make you have bigger Swift Mends. Ready for Anything is going to be Nature Swiftness cooldown. If you've never played before Legion and you don't know what Nature Swiftness is, basically it just makes your regrowth instant and double healing, and it doesn't cost any mana. It also works on Rebirth and Entangling Roots, but honestly, you maybe use it on Rebirth like 5% of the time, and you should never use it on Roots. But it's really useful for getting your tank topped off if they take a big hit of damage. Anyways, Unstoppable Growth is going to make your wild growth healing fall off less quickly, so it overall just increases the amount it heals for. Conflux of Elements is going to be the Night Phase specific conduit, and it's just going to make your Convoke X% stronger on healing and damage. And Deep Allegiance is going to be a cooldown on the Kyrian ability. In general, what you're going to want to play is going to be dungeon specific. But the most general build you're going to play is going to be Flash of Clarity and Ready for Anything. I think these are the two strongest potencies, but it is down to personal preference. The reason I've marked Unstoppable Growth with a yellow check mark is because if you're in a dungeon where you know you're going to need a lot more group healing than anything, it becomes an okay choice. But I wouldn't slot it in at a lower than like rank 5. And if you're going to slot it in, I think it personally should go in for Flash of Clarity, just because I think Nature Swiftness comes in handy a lot throughout the dungeon. But if you find that you're not really remembering to press it, then swapping it in for Ready for Anything and keeping the big clear class regrowths is totally fine too. I don't see any world where we're playing Floral Recycling, except maybe if you pick the Swiftmen Legendary, but even then, I think that it's lackluster. I also think Conflux of Elements is not good. And Deep Allegiance has a 1-minute ICD on the Pelagos Mastery buff. Kindred Empowerment does. So getting the cooldown on Deep Allegiance is irrelevant because you're just going to have to wait for the 1 minute to pass anyways. So you're basically wasting a potency slot if you take that one. As far as Endurance Conduits go, Tough as Bark is just going to be a Bark Skin cooldown reduction. Innate Resolve is going to be stronger regrowths on yourself, and Frenzied Regen if your Guardian affinity is going to be stronger. And Urson Vigor is just going to be extra health and armor when you first shift into bear form. I think all of these are actually passable and good in their own situations, but personally I'm going to be picking Tough as Bark because I use Bark Skin super liberally, pretty much on cooldown, and I think it's the most effective and like least management required to make the most use of, especially compared to Urson Vigor. Innate Resolve could be okay. I just don't see myself going in bear form and pressing Frenzied Regen that often as a healer. But it's going to be down to personal preference. As far as Finesse Conduits go, we have 4. Born Anew is like the Azerite trait from BFA. You'll just give your friend a well-fed buff when you res them. Born of the Wilds is going to reduce the cooldown of your level 35 talent. Front of the Pack is going to give you a longer and bigger Stampeding Roar. And Tireless Pursuit is just going to let you keep some of your speed when you come out of Cat and Travel form. They all come down to personal preference, I think, but I don't know that you'd ever pick either of these as they are. Front of the Pack is the strongest in a group setting without a doubt. Personally, I'm using Tireless Pursuit this expansion because I don't want to press Roar when I need to just get around quickly myself and make sure that my group's not dying. However, there are situations where I think having a longer Roar might be good further into the expansion when everybody has solid routes. Next, we're going to talk about talents. These are the talents I think everybody's going to be playing. On the first row, you'll notice we have Nourish and Abundance grayed out. That's because they're both terrible choices. Abundance had one singular use through all of BFA, and it was Galv in Temple. Cenarian Ward is literally the only choice on this row, and it's just increased tank healing and gives you another hot for your mastery on top of that, so it's definitely the only choice. On the level 25 row, Tiger Dash has too long of a cooldown to really be useful, on top of the fact that it takes away regular dash, which comes in handy a lot to have just like a little bit of burst of movement speed, as opposed to going the speed of sound. Renewal is a pretty decent choice actually, and if you prefer it and you don't think you need the mobility from Wild Charge, I actually think it's fine. I spent almost all of Season 2 and 3 in BFA playing with Renewal, and probably some of 4, but I think Wild Charge is going to be the most useful of your 3 choices. It gives you lots of unique movement options that make maneuvering around a pull a lot more simple, as well as just getting around the dungeon a lot easier. As far as the level 30 row goes, it's probably going to be Feral Affinity, since it's the highest sustained damage of the 2 DPS choices, being Balance Affinity is the other one. Balance Affinity does have some nifty uses on certain affix combos, such as Sanguine and X, or Spiteful and Y. Typhoon makes both of those much easier and alleviates a lot of issues caused by them. Not to mention, the 5-yard increase on all spellcasts is pretty useful in a couple of situations. But I also think that Feral Affinity's 15% movement speed bonus is very noticeable and useful. I think Guardian Affinity is a choice you're only going to take if you're not going to live a mechanic in a dungeon without the 6% DR it provides, and you're also losing out on everything I mentioned so far. I really just don't think it's going to be the choice. As far as the level 35 talent row goes, Heart of the Wild is going to be the best choice from a damage output standpoint. Bash definitely has a few uses, and so does Mass Entanglement. Mass is mostly for skipping, Bash if you don't have that many stops in your group. But I think that the damage you gain on bosses from Heart of the Wild, even if you only use it 4 times throughout the dungeon, is going to be more massive than anything you're going to get out of the other 2. On the level 40 row, we have Cultivation. Especially once we start to get higher mastery levels late into the season and the expansion, Cult is just going to be miles ahead of the others. Soul of the Forest is a useful choice if you're running a dungeon that has only really tank damage, but from what I can remember about Shadowlands, everywhere has some group damage built in. Cult is just going to be better for. However, if you really need just tank healing and your group is super tanky, you just run a tanky comp, I think that Soul's passable then. I don't think we're ever taking Incarn unless there's a situation where you need 30 seconds of instant regrowths and cheaper rejuves, and a 15% healing increase for 30 seconds on a 3-minute CD. I think that you're just not going to play it. On the 45 row, the only choice we have is Spring Blossoms. It puts a hot component into Efflow, which should always be on the ground. Inner Peace is just a minute off of Trank, which puts it in line with Convoke, except for that Trank is a significantly weaker cooldown, and I pretty much only value Inner Peace if you're going to be raiding. I don't think it should ever be taken in dungeons. And Overgrowth, I think, is a PvP specific talent. I don't think that you're ever going to take it. Nobody took it when it was a 45-second cooldown in BFA as a conflict major, so I don't see anybody taking it for 1-minute cooldown, especially when you have to give up Spring Blossoms, which is just a mastery amp. On the 50 row, the only choice I think we have is Photo. It's the most diverse talent because it can either give you increased group healing if you put it on yourself, or increased tank healing if you put it on your tank. Germination takes too many globals to get any use of, and Flourish is too long of a cooldown to see effective use, I think. I think it would also mostly be used as a tank throughput CD, and in the time it takes you to set up to make your Flourish actually effective, you could have just played better in the time before that to make sure your tank didn't get hit so hard, and get to the point where Flourish is going to save them. Next we're on to Legendaries. I think Echo of Eonar is the most likely candidate for our best legendary. It's 10% increased healing for 10 seconds, and it's a really high proc rate. I feel like it had at least 2 proc. It says 1 proc per minute, but it felt higher on beta. On top of that, once you're done with your 10% healing, it will go to your 3 DPS to give them 10% increased damage, and who doesn't like doing more damage? But if you don't like the fact that Eonar is like basically a passive legendary you don't play with at all, it just is like a proc, Circle of Life and Death I think is going to be our next choice. It makes your hots tick 15% faster, and your dots 25% faster. You spend a lot more globals refreshing your hots this way, and it is a lot harder to find time to DPS because of this. But you will notice that in short bursts your healing is going to be a lot higher, which is why I place it above the other choice, which is Verdant Infusion. I think that's the only other viable choice we have, and it's just going to be your Swiftman extending hots by 8 seconds on your target, Most often I found that this goes on my tank anyways, because Swiftman is just way worse than it was in BFA. The fact that it doesn't consume a hot is really nice, but I don't think that it stands out enough to be first or second choice. The 8-second extension is really nice if you can get it like chained onto Cenarian Ward, but again, I don't think that it's going to be picked. Outside of like very, very niche situations where your tank is constantly dying and nobody else is, and you just need longer hots. Next, I have Trinkets. I spent almost all of beta playing with Cabalist Hymnal because we played mostly Mage or Boomkin in our group for testing, and since it's empowered if you have multiple people in the group, it was just, I couldn't think of a second trinket that was really better to play, so I was just helping my DPS do more damage. The crit from it is okay, I guess, but we don't really need crit as resto druid. So if you can play something else, or you don't have casters in your group playing it, so you don't have a frost mage, you don't have a moonkin, I would not wear it. The trinket I do recommend everybody get is Boon of the Archon. It's a drop from Spires, so you're going to see it in your weekly chests, and it was my favorite trinket to play on beta without a doubt. It spawned orbs on the ground whenever I was healing, and then my DPS can walk over it, get versatility, which increases their damage and also heals them, so I don't have to heal them, which means I can spend more time doing DPS myself. If people remember to walk over it and we were actually getting full value out of it, I found that it was doing like 4%-ish of my healing in a key on beta, which is quite a lot for a trinket that I don't have to play with at all. I don't have to pay attention to at all. Unbound Changeling is just a haste proc. It comes from Miss Satyrna Scythe. I think it's a really good second choice after Boon, and it's strong, especially if you don't have someone needing you to play Hymnal. The tooltip is wrong just because Wowhead didn't have anything good or accurate, but it's like 300 haste at max eye level, I believe. The eye level you'll see out of your weekly chest, so it's pretty strong. And then fourth choice, if for some reason you don't like haste procs and you don't like giving your group passive healing and versatility, I picked Siphoning Phylactery Shard, which drops from Necrotic Wake. Basically, you press it, give up some of your health, which as the healer, you're always full because you are a smart player. You are not a DPS player. Then whenever somebody's low and you heal them, you give them double the health you gave up. It worked a little different when I played with it on beta, but I still think that it's super strong in this iteration. Yeah, that's about it for trinkets. Next I have stat priority, and I also have consumables listed, but before I get into the consumables, just you want mastery over haste, you want 20-25% mastery, 30% or more haste, and after that you get verse. Do not get crit. Crit is useless unless you're playing second Soulbind Kyrian for some reason, because you're a weirdo. Literally don't get crit. And then, okay. For food, you're going to eat either the feast that your tank gives you at the start, or you're going to use versatility food. And the reason you're going to use verse food is because with the new fish feasts that are going in, that are Shadowlands only, which will be available next week when the Darkmoon Fair comes up, that verse buff that you get from that, if it works like the old fish feasts, which we don't know because they didn't give us these on beta, it'll overwrite any buff that isn't versatility, but if you eat verse food, it won't overwrite it because it's a weaker versatility buff, which is why you eat steak a la mode, because you don't have to worry about giving up intellect for a small amount of verse. You just keep all your versatility. As far as enchants go, there's actually like a ton of useless enchants this expansion for some reason, but this is what you're going to want, I think. It's Leech on Cloak. You can skip the boot enchant unless you're really OCD or find a situation where you're going to take fall damage, which you won't because you're in cat form all the time when you're falling. But it's Speed of Soul on boots if you want it. Eternal Intellect on bracers because that's the intellect slot this time. Eternal Stats on chest. Tenet of Mastery on ring. Or if you're over the mastery that I mentioned before, you can go haste or verse, but I think that getting some mastery through your enchants frees up more valuable stat weights later. And then for your weapon, you want Celestial Guidance, which is just a 5% intellect proc on casts. You're also going to want healing and mana pots as always. And the new drink pot is called Potion of Spiritual Clarity. You sit down, drink that, and get 20% of your mana back. More with Alkstone, which is, I'm pretty sure healers are going to be playing Alchemy again solely for Alkstone. But with the 5-minute cooldown, I don't ever see us drinking plain mana potions. So it's healing pots and drink pots, basically. And then for oil that goes on your weapon, we want Embalmer's Oil, because Shadow Core Oil is the DPS one. And I found that Embalmer's Oil was again doing 3 or 4% of my healing throughout a key or more. If you don't need the healing, Shadow Core Oil is passable. You're just going to find that it's a little less useful. And then Spectral Flask of Power is just the primary stat one because we're not drinking Stam Flasks. This isn't Sky Captain Crag, you don't need it. As far as meta strength goes, I think Resto Druid's strong contender for the best. It has strong throughput like it always does, and it does okay damage. It's definitely nerfed from how it was in previous expansions. But if you're running with a tank that doesn't take a lot of damage, Demon Hunters, then you have a lot of time to sit in cat form and do damage. But the reason that I put it equal to Resto Shaman is despite the fact that Shaman has lower throughput in healing, it does way more damage, like double or more. So I think that those two will be fighting for king, and I think Disc Priest will come in third, solely because they have gotten nerfs for the last couple patches. Even with the 5% stam from Fort, I don't think it saves the class, but we don't know yet. And the last thing I want to talk about is cooldowns. Druid has 2 cooldowns baked in Tranquility and Innervate, and then a Covenant cooldown. Trank is a 3-minute CD, does a ton of throughput if you channel it, but I would say in 95% of situations, I press Trank and I instantly cancel it because I just want the mastery bonus from the hot attached to it. There are some situations where you'll channel it full, but I don't think that I've found any in Shadowlands so far, where it's super useful to sit there for 8 seconds. I guess it's like 6 with our current haste levels. Maybe during Lust, but I still don't think that it'll be that useful. Especially because they took away the ability to walk with Trank in BFA. I just don't see it ever being something that you want to sit and channel in any of these dungeons. The other baked in cooldown for Druids is 3 minutes on Innervate. Gives you free healing for 10 seconds. You want to use that as often as possible, especially like if you're in a tyrannical setting or any time where you're going to be chain pulling a lot. You basically want to hit Innervate on CD to conserve as much mana as possible, and that way you can get multiple uses as well. If you use it, say, once at the beginning of a fight and then it goes 3.5 minutes, then you get 2 uses out of it. And inside the 10 seconds, you're always going to want to use Rejuve on everybody in the party. Make sure you get a Wild Growth and replace your F-Flow to get a full duration one, even if it's not about to expire, just because you want to be as efficient as possible. If Night Phase your Covenant invokes your 2-minute cooldown, that is just Trank but a billion times better. Basically, it'll just apply all the hots for you, has a chance to cast Flourish even if we're not spec'd into it, which gives us double hot speed. And it'll also cast Swift Mends on people without consuming the hot it gave them. So it's just far and away the best button that we can press. I wouldn't be afraid to press this button super liberally for the healing component of it. And if you don't know that there's, or if you know for sure that there's not a lot of healing in the next 2 minutes, just feel free to use it as a damage cooldown. If you're Balance Affinity, you're going to want to stand far away from everything so you can get Star Surges out of it. And then if you are a Feral Affinity, you want to make sure to be in melee range so that you get your bleeds refreshed, ferocious bites that cost no combo points. It also generates combo points if you apply bleeds, so that's pretty nice. And if for some reason you're Kyrian, Kindred Empowerment's just a 1-minute CD that funnels 30% of your healing into your soul link, which I think should always be the tank if you're the healer, and he'll also soak 40% of your damage for you. If there's a large amount of group damage going out and you need to keep your tank alive, I think that's the most optimal time to press the button, just so that you can put all your healing on everybody and get it all funneled into the tank as well as keep everyone alive. And the other time to press it would be when there's no group healing and tons of tank damage, because you're basically just going to get 30% stronger heals on your tank. So you're going to want to like put wild growth on your team and rejuves maybe, and then press it and then just spam into your tank. And that is pretty much all you need to know to start playing the class. If you have further questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below or DM me directly on Discord. I'll leave my Discord in the description. If you have any feedback, I'd appreciate it a lot if you left it in the comments. I stream a large majority of my keys on my Twitch channel, which will also be in the description if you want to watch more Resto Druid content. And then, like I said at the beginning, in my next video, I'll be going over the more basic rotational stuff about Druid for people that have never played the class, and probably also tackling how to prepare for all the situations you might encounter in a dungeon, because there are only a few, and they're just variations of each other. But yeah, thanks guys, thanks for watching, have a good one.